Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Inland Empire. This film came out in the year 2006. It was written and directed by David Lynch. This is famously, or infamously, depending on how you look at it, I really don't know, it depends on who you ask, this is the last feature-length film that David Lynch ever made, and since then he has gone on to pursue all sorts of artistic endeavors. Everything from painting, to creating music, to writing more short films, and eventually making his way back to the mainstream cult collective when he did the third season of Twin Peaks: The Return. But Inland Empire is the last feature-length film that he made, unfortunately for us Lynch fans. And when you watch it, you really do get a sense of that in a certain way. It does feel like Lynch just throwing all the shit at the fan and letting go. Relinquishing any sort of accessibility he would have had with audiences, relinquishing control, and this whole movie to me just screams, fuck it, I don't care anymore. And you'll notice, little by little, through the progression of his films artistically, he seems to be reaching for something that is very specific. A removal from what is familiar, anything that is in reality, and delving more into the unconscious mind where the dream world and the inspiration for art and cinema in particular meet. As his career goes on, you do see those little cracks in the illusion in a lot of his great films, and he starts to stray more and more from these conventional narratives and these tropes, and he's wanting us to be more conscious of film as a manipulative device, or at least that's how it seems to me as a viewer. And we really start to see this take shape, the idea for this thesis, the most when you watch a movie like Lost Highway, though that film feels more kind of like a rough draft of what I do see as his great masterpiece, his great magnum opus, and that would be Mulholland Drive. He just found a sweet spot there, I think. He was sort of enticing us, manipulating us in similar ways that you might see from a film like Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, or Robert Altman's Three Women, manipulating us in the first half, giving us something very structured, a narrative that pulls us in to an extent like a regular movie would, but only to remove that artifice to a certain extent in the second half to reveal a much more kind of dreamlike, hazy, vulnerable, devastating core. The cracks in the illusion are more than just cracks at this point. He's really butchered the landscape here, and Lynch's point of view naturally is becoming more and more pronounced. And then you have Inland Empire here, which, comes out a few years after Mulholland Drive, and it goes even further. Unlike the previous two films, he doesn't seem to be that interested in putting you in, or rooting you in a sense of reality much at all. He doesn't feel necessarily that you need to be grounded in a narrative. He's just fully in esoteric, experimental mode here, where he clearly finds a lot of comfort. And there's something that is very exciting, rebellious about that particular venture, I think, because as I've said before, this movie just comes off as somebody who is tired of the way things have been. And with this, he got to have complete creative control, which he hadn't had in a long, long time. It's just a big fuck you. He self-funded the entire project, and that's why the film does feel sort of cheap and like an experimental art project that was maybe made by like a graduate film student in certain ways. And I don't necessarily mean that as an insult. Laura Dern, of course, a dear friend of Mr. Lynch, she stars in it as well as co-producing it. And the script, from what I understand, was really not much more than a blueprint, an idea, an outline that was often improvised on the spot. He's even shooting this on digital film, completely foregoing what he might have done in the past. And yeah, I just see this really as a fun exercise. It's exploring creativity and seeing where you arrive in the process of making something. And this can either be a very interesting experiment when different artists do this, or it can be just kind of a bunch of rubbish that doesn't ultimately mean anything when you add it up together. And I think this is the kind of movie when people ask, should I see it? It's very hard for me to answer that question, because I think this is a movie that is made for a very specific type of person. Some people are going to totally respond to it, totally appreciate it, completely, speak the language of it. And then I think the majority of people, though, likely will not. Most people, I think, are going to see this movie as quite insufferable, and that's not surprising at all. But again, this is Lynch, and I don't think he really cares about the people who aren't interested. And this attitude, I think, has both positive attributes for the specific project we're going for here, but it also has some maybe detrimental aspects to it. But you can't deny that this is him, at least it seems that way. It seems as though he's getting closer and closer to what he considers his most authentic creative self, getting closer to having his personal cinematic philosophy there on full display for us. I just think this is a film for those who are really hardcore surrealist movie fans, and then certainly, most importantly, this is for hardcore David Lynch fans. I would not recommend this to a casual Lynch fan, we'll say. A casual Lynch fan has probably seen Blue Velvet, has probably seen Twin Peaks and such, but if a movie like Mulholland Drive frustrates you, then best of luck with this one. But if you love seeing Lynch kind of dive more boldly into that sort of territory, and you're just, a curious person by nature, interested in unique experiences, then do I have the movie for you here? I know there are a lot of people who really struggle with the meaning on a surface level for this one, as well as just, the internal meanings as well. But I think my approach to this movie is just to relax, just take a deep breath and experience it. Because if you know Lynch the way that I do, which is quite well, and if you know how he ticks and you understand his cinematic thesis overall as it's been presenting thus far, you know it tends to be slight variations on the same themes, the same idea over time, just presented in different forms. So in that sense, this is just another progression into that, and it makes sense with the other films, and so I didn't find it difficult really at all. It is kind of that Luis Buñuel, Salvador Dali mentality of just don't think about it too hard, just go, experience the ride, feel it, trust in your sensory experience, trust in just your emotions, your gut reactions of things, and just see where it takes you. And you'll find, even if it doesn't make literal sense to you in a story sense, you'll find something is making sense within you. It's coming together. Yes, this is a very metaphysical sort of apparatus theory laden piece here. And that's the place I think that Lynch just finds to be the most honest part of the human mind. And I tend to agree overall. So yes, rewatching it now for the first time in a really long time, like I said, I wasn't trying to piece together the very fractured nature of the narrative I just watched. And when you do that, you start to realize, Mulholland Drive, of course, is, like most people know, one of my favorite movies of all time. And after seeing that film, you realize there are many similarities between that film and Inland Empire. Both begin in a sort of Hollywood dream world of an actress being put in a part and, the possibility of her getting famous as an idea in the beginning. And then that illusion is going to slowly dissolve and we're going to get closer and closer to the truth and the heart. Both films, in a way, are Hollywood deconstructed. And Hollywood is, I think, the perfect crux, the perfect metaphor for Lynch's dream world and how it represents maybe the area of our consciousness that we are comfortable with enough to experience, on an entertainment basis. But by doing that, a lot of times we are covering up or maybe afraid to explore some of the darker areas of consciousness at the same time. And he's exploring those darker sides again here with Inland Empire. He's exploring Hollywood and the dream of fame, how that dream, that idea influences your waking life, and then how waking life can influence the dream. Art imitates life. Life imitates art. And it's all blending together in a sort of soporific haze, almost like you could be while you're watching this movie. It feels, when you watch it, like you are half asleep. Or you could kind of drift while you're watching it, and it really wouldn't make that much of a difference. And I think that's certainly the point. He's going for it to an extent. There is a meditative aspect to this movie with long stretches of like hypnotic silence that sort of envelops you in a way that maybe a movie like Stalker might, or 2001, A Space Odyssey. Really no concept of time here at all. And all of the events that are taking place in the waking life of the Laura Dern character, very similarly to Naomi Watts' character in Mulholland Drive, they all appear in jumbled fragments, in surrealistic metaphors, and the dialogue here is kind of, it feels almost like it's going on a loop, around and around, never really seeming to arrive at a conclusion in a basic idea. And, a lot of times when we have dialogue in our dreams and in our nightmares, it's very similar. It often doesn't add up. It's not logical. Though where Mulholland Drive has a limitation in terms of how far it's going to delve into the unconscious, this one just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper into that unconscious abyss. This is not a dream within a dream. It's like a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream, and it keeps going. And it also is very metatextual. It's a film within a film, in another film, in another film, to the point where you really do lose concept of where it's all going. And especially after that first third of the movie, it's really starting to feel like an immersive, almost 3D experience where you're going down these dark hallways and then you go into another one, and it feels like you are getting lost in a sort of rabbit hole. One dream is leading to another, like a series of tunnels that are more maze-like in structure. And through that, you are so submerged in the strangeness that you truly feel like you are being lulled into some sort of Freudian dream world. And because the movie is is very long. It's nearly, I think it's about 3 hours in length. I personally felt like all of my life outside of the movie, I completely checked it at the door. I was fully plunged into this experience to the point where it was over, it took me a few minutes to come to recognize that I was in reality and there was this concept called time, which I think is a great effect that Lynch has on us and that he understands quite well, this soporific state, and rarely do you ever get that, I think, at least from a movie. Lynch, of course, is a huge proponent of highlighting, I think, the apparatus theory in his films, how film bleeds into our morals and our ideas in our everyday lives, and how we often can't distinguish where the root of those ideas came from. It's like, are my thoughts my own, or did I experience them in a movie? Am I perceiving this more because of the way that pop culture and all of that is coloring the way I see it? Which thoughts are my own and which are not? And this film, I think, explores that in a way that is very haunting. Having Laura Dern, this woman, and at the center of the movie, and she is, at least in the beginning of this movie, we see her portrayed as an actress, and seeing this romanticized life. She's rich, and it may not be hers. It's more a fantasy. Though there are echoes maybe of something that is closer to her real life embedded within this romanticized world. But more and more is bubbling to the surface that she can't hide any longer. Through each tunnel, as you're getting deeper into this maze, this kind of coiled core of the psyche, he is removing that red curtain more and more. And I love the idea of, as a viewer, you lose very early on the idea of where does the dream begin and where does it end? And also, where does the film end and where does the dream begin? Questioning consciousness, essentially. And as a viewer myself, I admit that I too, fall for these manipulative devices without even realizing it at times, and in ways that I find to be quite genius. I am lulled into the experience as I think it's meant to be. And through that, there is something to this film that I find quite uplifting, surprisingly. Something here that is more transcendent, more spiritual, that I don't think is as prevalent in a movie like Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway or even Blue Velvet. Those are darker pieces, whereas I think this has a sense of hopefulness. And perhaps it's Lynch's connection, his passion for meditation and that overall peace of mind that he's achieved over the years, but I think that it separates this film from the rest of the canon in a way that I think is quite unique, quite special. My favorite moment in the film is towards the end of the movie, where Laura Dern is wounded and bleeding out, and she lies down on the street next to two homeless women. I think it might be one of the most profound, one of the most powerful scenes in a Lynch film ever. A sort of acceptance in the clarity of mind when you've lost everything, even your own body. And suddenly in this panic and realizing you're gonna die, there is a freedom to let go. A release that truly transcends the body and the mind that people often don't consider when they think about death. So many people get caught up in all the stress and the noise of the world, and in Lynch movies, pretty much all of his major characters seem to do that over time, and they get so destroyed by the world that their emotions start to distort those realities. Technicolor sad clowns, wiping their makeup through the tears. And this character, the Laura Dern character, whether she is a real character, whether she is a dream manifestation or a cinematic representation, I don't know what you want to consider her, but she has all of those characteristics as well. And yet in this death scene, like I said, there is a sense of hope, a sense of beauty. She's got nothing anymore. But neither do these two homeless women who are watching her die, yet they just carry on a conversation. They are not bound by these expectations for the world because they've been beaten down to the point where their expectations are so low. And when I watch this, I am in tears. I am so moved by this particular scene and how effective it is. And then the camera pans out and pans out and pans out, and you realize that this is a set. Then there is a camera shooting them. It is a film within a film. It's not real. It is part of the manipulation to a degree. Though what I'm saying, it's much more complicated than that if I were to delve into it. But just that moment when you realize that the camera is filming, it is, for me at least, it was such a gut punch because of how much I was in the moment. Falling for those emotions, as soon as I saw that, I was just like, oh, fuck you, man. But I also don't think that any of this film is pure manipulation, in maybe like with a negative connotation. It's part of an evolving story that is both laced with a sense of artifice, and it has somehow is becoming increasingly more distorted in terms of how reality and fantasy is blending. When the homeless woman in the scene, or I should say the actor playing the homeless woman in the scene, starts to talk about her cousin, I think that's a really great story for that moment. It's the story about a woman, playing a part in a sense for society, for her life, but she's also facing the pain of mortality and relinquishing control. Yet another anecdote that is mirroring the narrative or the dream, the core story, in a way that I find to be very honest, even though it technically isn't. Even when something is manipulation, it's meant to be theater, artifice or whatever. There's often, even more so, ironically, there is more honesty and vulnerability within art than there can be in reality. It can be more meaningful through art. And whatever you want to consider this storyline to be, Laura Dern's storyline, I don't know. I feel like it can be all kinds of things, and to limit it to one or the others is really boring. I mean, what is her character anyway? Do we really know? I mean, is she an actress? Is she a prostitute? Does she get killed by Devon's wife, or does any of that really matter? I approach this film the same way that I approach Mulholland Drive in terms of my own personal philosophies, how I interpret it. And, I'm just one person. You can interpret it in your own ways or whatever. But I talked in my review years ago for Mulholland Drive about, who is the main character here? Is it Betty? Is it Diane? Is it Rita? Is it Camila? But I personally didn't see them all as individual characters. I saw them all as different facets of the same human being, more as symbols, as archetypes that represent different abstractions of emotions, memories drifting within a human being. And I feel so similarly about this film because when you look at it, the jealous wife, she says she's going to kill Laura Dern with a screwdriver, but it turns out that Laura Dern actually stabs herself with the screwdriver. At least at some point, that's what you see. And when she shoots the major antagonistic force in this film on a surface level, I guess it would be like her abusive husband, when she shoots him, her face is transposed onto his in a really distorted, creepy fashion. It's as if this person is wanting to destroy themselves. Just like in Mulholland Drive, Naomi Watts' character is wanting to destroy herself. These are ideas, perhaps representations of emotions kind of firing off within a person as their life is leaving their body. People that are so tragically searching for something and are never satisfied, so they meet their end. It's a hard place to be, of course, naturally in real life, but when you're exploring it through Lynch's lens, it suddenly becomes a tool of learning. I think, it's so full of nuance, so full of richness, the layers and the feelings, those sensations. But we must also remember that Laura Dern may not be the protagonist at all, that it might be the unnamed person that is watching the film within the film at the beginning. She, has tears as she's watching this whole experience. She's connecting with Laura Dern's experience, just as we connect to, the heroes, the protagonists in movies all the time. We project our own experiences onto them. In the end, when Laura Dern kind of comes out of the fantasy world and she's in the room with this person watching, the spectator, of course, she makes out with her, and then Laura Dern disappears, and immediately the spectator is left with this sort of emptiness and overcome by emotion. A reminder that the illusion is not real, it is not concrete, and yet within the emotion it sinks in and means something that is perhaps even more meaningful than what you can say is concrete, or what you can see, what you can touch. Perhaps there is something more meaningful. And I think this is Lynch just at his most mindful when he's exploring said concepts. So there is a lot that I find to be very, very compelling in this movie. As I've said before, I am affected by certain scenes, certain sections of it more than I have been affected by anything that Lynch has ever done, which is really saying something. However, I don't necessarily see it as Lynch's quintessential work, even though it seems like it kind of wants to be, or maybe it seems like it could have been that quintessential work, maybe is how I should say it. Like I mentioned, those other two movies, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and then you've got this one. I see this almost as part of a trilogy of films that are all coming one after another after another. They are like core stepping stones. They are key works that show a progression into Lynch's self-discovery. Lost Highway, as I've said before in my review for it, I find it to be a bit half-baked at times, though Mulholland Drive is the quintessential work because of how it finds that perfect balance between the cohesion of the narrative and how to deconstruct it in a way that feels, I think, the most satisfying for the viewer. Decoding the illusion, I think, is the true objective here. And in order for that to, fully come to fruition, to be truly effective, I think you do need to root the audience in a story that they can latch onto to an extent. That slowly builds to the decoding of that illusion so that when these truths are revealed, I think it's just far more effective as a viewer, because that's the whole point. It's seeing how we too can become a victim to the art itself, and then those smoke and mirrors get revealed to us. And with Inland Empire, as much as I enjoy it, as much as it's a movie that's very much designed for somebody like me, I think to a point it's too rooted in obscurity. So I think that the themes that are so prevalent and powerful in Mulholland Drive, here it gets a little muddled and a little lost. I wish it could have been more fully realized. I prefer the look of more cinematic for Lynch and less cinema verite as it is here, but you know, of course, I'm very aware too that it was self-funded, and that's kind of the point. But overall, I think this work is very, very cool, and it is Lynch. Yes, it is him at his most indulgent, but also I think maybe his most honest as a creator, his most unbridled. I don't see this movie as the type to, you know, affect a ton of people, but a select few, perhaps. And I'm one of those people. I love the hell out of this movie. I completely bought into it. I let myself marinate in it for a very long time, watched it again, and it really spoke to me. And I think, you know, as I've said before in this review, if you love Lynch, if you really love Lynch, like a lot, you cannot miss this movie. It's great. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you look over here, you will see my Patreon supporters. You guys are amazing. The link to support is below. Also, I am a portrait artist, a sketch artist, and I do commission portraits. I also sell prints, and all of that can be found on my website. So if that's something you're interested in, just email me, let me know. I'm happy to work with you. All my social media will be below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you want to. Catch you next time.